Simon says subscribe and click on the bell icon to receive notifications.
We've made the accompanying exercise files for this tutorial available for free. Just click the link below in the video details to get these.
In this section of the course, we're going to shift our focus from pivot tables to pivot charts because these two really do go hand in hand. A lot of the time, once you've created a pivot table to analyze your data, you're going to want to present that data visually using a pivot chart. As we know, a picture speaks 1,000 words, and sometimes it's a lot easier to make sense of data when it's displayed in a chart. Now, I will say, when you're thinking about putting together a chart, you really need to consider the data that you want to display and only display the data that is relevant. And not all charts are created equally. For example, something like a pie chart or a donut chart tends to work better for smaller data sets. Whereas if you have time-based data, which we do here, we're looking at values over 2 years, 2018 and 2019. These in general are best displayed with something like a line chart. Now, currently, if I want to put the data that I have in this pivot table into a chart, my chart is going to be quite chaotic looking. So let's take a look at that first of all, and then we'll explore better ways of working with pivot charts. So once you've created your pivot table, simply click in it, go up to the Pivot Table Analyze ribbon, and over in the Tools group, we have a Pivot Chart button. And this is going to open up the Insert Chart dialog box. And there are many different chart types in Excel. And these chart types are divided down into different categories. And each category has many different iterations of that style of chart. Now, if you click on one of these categories, and you get a message like this, it means that based on your data, Excel can't produce this type of chart. Now, as I said, this isn't ideal chart information. Because it is time-based data, if I go to Line Chart and just select to insert one of those, take a look at what we get. Now, I'm going to drag this out. It's doing a pretty good job of displaying it, but take a look at what we've got down here. We kind of have it split down. Premium luxury standard, so on and so forth. And because I have quite a bit of data, it means that this chart ends up being quite wide. In order to display this effectively, I would really need to stretch this out quite far. I couldn't have it sort of like that on the page because then no one can see the information clearly. Now, I could very well just make it wider and display it like that. That isn't too much of a problem in this case. But I might want to take a look at the data that I'm choosing to display and refine my data before putting it into a chart. So let's delete out the chart, just pressing delete on my keyboard. Maybe I look at this data and I think to myself, you know what, actually, I'm going to rearrange this a little bit. So maybe I want to present a chart to some key stakeholders, and they're only really interested in seeing the gross sales per country by year. They're not really interested in the breakdown of the products. So I'm going to make some changes to my pivot table. I'm going to remove the product field, and I'm also going to remove the range field as well. So now I'm simply left with a list of countries and the years. And this is a much more manageable data set to put into a chart. So now if I go back to Pivot Table Analyze and click on Pivot Chart, I could choose something like a column chart, or maybe I want to go back to a line chart and display it in that way. Now I think in this case, I'm going to choose a column chart and click on OK. Now what about if I have my data organized in a different way again? So let's delete out this chart. What I'm going to do here is we're going to remove year. I'm going to drag country into columns, and this time I'm going to drag month name down into rows. Now, it might be that I'm only interested in displaying the top 5 months. So the top 5 months with the most gross sales. So what we can do here is we can right click and we can apply a filter. Now, if we go down to filter, I have a top 10 filter in here. So if I'm only interested in the top 5 by gross sales, I can take this down to 5. I can see items by total gross sales. Click on OK. And now I can put this data into a pivot chart. Let's go to Analyze, Pivot Chart, And this time I'm going to go for a line chart, click on OK, and I have my data represented in a different way. So the point I'm really trying to make here when you're thinking about putting your data into a pivot chart is not only think about what is important to display in the chart, but also think about what is the most appropriate chart type. In the previous lesson, we started talking about pivot charts and how you can pick the appropriate pivot chart for your data. And in this lesson, we're going to create another pivot chart, and then I'm going to show you some of the techniques you can use to really format that pivot chart and make it look good. Now, once again, we are going to rearrange our data set. So I'm going to remove month name, and we're going to put country back down into rows. And that's pretty much all I want for my first pivot chart, just the country and the total gross sales. Notice that now I've changed the layout, this label doesn't really make sense. It says country/product. So let's double click and let's just change that to country. Now another thing I can do here is I can sort my data. So I want the highest sales at the top going all the way down to the lowest sales. So let's right click, go to sort, and I'm going to say sort largest to smallest to put those in order. Now I'm ready to create my first pivot chart. So let's jump up to PivotTable Analyze, click on our Pivot Chart button, and now I can go in and choose my pivot chart. So we're going to start out with just a basic column chart. Remember, we do have other iterations of the same type of chart up here. Now I'm just going to go for a plain old clustered column, and let's click on OK. Now with any of these charts, you can drag them out to resize them, and what you'll notice is that they will come with these little grey filter buttons. So if I actually want to apply filtering to the chart itself, I can click the country button, and then I can go in and maybe just choose to filter by Japan and United Kingdom, and that chart is going to update. Now let's just clear that filter, because I prefer to apply any filters to the actual pivot table instead, which will in turn update the pivot chart. So let me show you what I mean. If I click the filter drop down in the pivot table, I can do exactly the same thing here, and that will not only update the pivot table, but also the pivot chart. Because I don't tend to filter on my charts, I like to remove these grey buttons. And I would say that when you are designing or thinking about designing your pivot chart, you want to make them as clean looking as possible. So remove any unwanted or unnecessary items. So to get rid of these grey buttons, we just need to right click and go to hide all field buttons on chart to get rid of those. Now what else on this chart is pretty unnecessary? Well, if we take a look at my legend, I just have total in there. Now I don't really need the total because the bars themselves are showing me the total. So I'm going to remove the legend as well. Now when it comes to formatting your chart, there are many different ways that you can do this. Once you're clicked on your chart, notice that you have 3 additional contextual ribbons: Pivot Chart Analyze, Design, and also Format. You also have a little plus button next to your pivot chart, which allows you to customize each element of your chart. And there are even more options for formatting your charts in the right-click menu as well. So lots of different places to go to apply formatting. So if I want to remove this legend, I can click on the plus to show my chart elements, and I can deselect legend, and that will get rid of it. Alternatively, if we just undo for a moment there, this is simply just a text box. I could just choose to delete that out. So what else might I want to do to this chart to make it look a little bit more interesting? Well, I'm probably going to want to add a chart title. Now again, this is just simply a text box. We can double click to edit it. So what is this chart displaying? Well, it's the total gross sales by country. And you can apply whatever formatting you like to this title. So if I go to the home ribbon, let's make this bold, and I'm going to change the color. Let's make it a dark blue color, like so, and maybe even slightly bigger. There we go. It might even be that I don't want it in the middle. I want to move it over to the side. Now if I hold down Shift as I drag this, It ensures that it stays in line. Now, what other formatting might I want to apply here? Well, maybe I want to change the color of these bars. Remember, this is just being taken from the theme that's in use in Excel. Now, there are a couple of different ways I can change the colors. I could go up to the Design tab, and then I have a Change Colors drop down just here. Now, this is only going to show me different palettes based on my theme template. So everything you see here is still within that same color range that my theme uses. If I want to apply a completely different color, I can simply select the bars, and notice when I click on one, it's going to select them all. Go up to the Format tab, and then I can manually choose what color I want to use. And if it's not part of my theme colors, I can choose more colors and then really choose a color that's suitable for what I'm doing. So I'm going to go for this sort of tealy green kind color. Let's click on OK. What else can I add to my chart? Well, let's click the plus and take a look at some of the other elements. What I might choose to do is add something like data labels. Notice as I hover over, I get a preview of what that looks like. And this is going to actually show the value from the pivot table at the top of the bar. Now, sometimes I like to do this because it means that I can effectively remove that y-axis and make my chart look a lot cleaner. So let's go for data labels. If we click the arrow, I have a choice of where I want those positioned. So I'm going to have these on the inside end. Now, I know that looks a bit weird at the moment, but we are going to make a change to these bars, which is going to make this look a lot nicer. So let's choose inside end for the time being. So now that I have those values there, I don't really need to have this axis showing the values. So the easiest way for me to get rid of this is just to select the vertical axes and press delete. Now, because we've added these data labels on the inside end, I'm going to widen out the actual bars themselves. So let's click on the bars. This time I'm going to jump into Format Data Series. And what you'll notice here in the pane on the right hand side is that the option at the bottom is gap width. So I can make these bars narrower or I can make them wider. So I'm going to drag them out so that they accommodate those labels nicely. Now that I've done that, I think I'm going to select my data labels. I'm going to make them bold, and I'm also going to change the color of them to white. So for this, we just need to go up to the Home tab. We're going to make them bold, and then we're going to change the font to white. So this is now looking like a really nice, clean looking chart. Now, one important thing when you are working with charts, and particularly when you're formatting them, it really matters where you're clicked on the chart. So if I'm clicked on the title, any formatting I apply will apply to the title. If I'm clicked on the plot area, any formatting I apply will be to this area. Same with the bars and the data labels and the axes, so on and so forth. And I will say that for some of these elements, they're quite hard to select by clicking on the chart. But if we go up to the Format ribbon, in this first group here, we can make this a lot easier on ourselves by using this selection menu. So if I know that I want to format the plot area of my chart, and I know I'm editing the correct area, what I might want to do now is go to Shape Fill and maybe fill that plot area with a light grey background fill. So don't forget about this little selection drop down. It can come in really useful, particularly if you're struggling to select an object on your chart. In the previous lesson, we started to apply formatting to our pivot chart, and we're going to continue exploring formatting options in this lesson as well. Now, something else I might want to do here is maybe make these grid lines stand out a little bit more. Now, grid lines are one of those things which are quite hard to select sometimes. So I'm going to go up to the Format tab, and let's use our selection just here. So I'm going to select vertical major grid lines, and then we can go to the shape outline and we can choose a color for our grid lines. Now I'm going to keep these fairly pale, so let's go for a light gray color. So they're still visible, but they're not too harsh. Now, other formatting options that you have when it comes to your pivot tables, if we jump up to the Design tab, notice that we have chart styles in the middle here. Now, if we click the drop down, it's going to open up a gallery, and we can hover over and we can choose to apply different chart styles. Now notice that even though I have changed the color scheme of my chart, when you use a chart style, it's still going to apply using the theme that you have selected in Office, which is why we're seeing this blue color as opposed to the teal color that I've selected. We also have a way of adding multiple elements in one go. So all of the editing that we've done to this chart so far, I've added a chart title, I've removed the legend, I've added data labels. Those are all separate tasks in themselves. But if I'm pushed for time, I could choose a quick layout, which is going to apply multiple elements at the same time. And which one of these you choose is entirely up to you, but it can be a nice, quick, time-saving option. We also have an Add Chart Element button just here, and this is very similar to clicking on the plus next to the chart. You have access to all the different chart elements, and you can customize them from here. So if I wanted to change the position of these data labels to the outside end, I could do that from here as well. Now, if we take a look towards the end of this ribbon, we also have an option here to redefine the data that we're using. Now, the first one here is Switch Row Column. So if I click this, it's going to switch that data around. Now, because I don't have a legend showing, it makes it a bit difficult to understand what we're looking at here. So let's just turn that legend back on. So now you can see that the country is represented by the colored bar, and then we just have the total showing in the axes. So effectively, we're switching the data around. We also have a Select Data button just here as well. So maybe if I want to refine what I'm looking at or select a different set of data to display in my chart, I can do that from here as well. And if I get to this stage and I decide, actually, you know what, I don't really like this column chart, I want to switch it out for a different chart type. Well, I can do that from here as well. Change chart type, and I can go in and maybe select something entirely different. So let's switch this around and do a bar chart instead. There we go. It is as simple as that. Notice that it's kept all of the settings. So I still have my teal color applied, and I still have my data label showing on the inside end. Now, there are so many options when it comes to formatting charts. We're definitely not going to get time to go through every single one of them in this course, but let's just have a little bit more of a look at that right-click menu. So, for example, these numbers just here, let's click on them, right-click, and let's say Format Data Labels. Now, take a look at all the different options we have. We have different categories running across the top. So we have fill and line. So if I want to maybe put a border around the outside of these labels, I could do that. In fact, let's do that. Let's see what it looks like. Let's go for solid line. Let's go for a black line. And if we click away, you can see kind of what that looks like just there. I'm going to change that back to no line. If we go across to the next category, we can apply things like shadow, glow, different types of effects. The next categories, we can adjust the size and also the alignment of these labels. And then finally on the end, this is where we can customize our label options. So currently it's telling me that the label contains the value and it's showing leader lines. So if I wanted to include something else in here, so let's go for series name, you can see it now puts total in front of that. If I select category name, it's going to put the country as well as the number. So you can really customize what you're seeing in there. And then of course we have our label position we're currently displaying on the inside end. And then finally at the bottom we have a number group. So maybe I don't want to display these values with a currency symbol. What I could do is choose a different category. We're going to go for currency. And then I can say that I don't want any decimal places. And if I don't want a symbol, I can simply say none. And notice how that changes what I'm looking at. So for every single element on your chart, if you right click, you're going to get a similar menu. Now the menu is going to be different depending on what you're clicked on. So there we were looking at data labels. If I click on the plot background, right click and go to Format Plot area, I get options related to the plot as opposed to data labels. So definitely worth having a browse through some of those. Now the final thing I want to show you in this lesson is how quick and easy it is to create multiple pivot charts. Now it might be that based off of your pivot table data, you want to do lots of different types of analysis. So we've already done our gross sales by country, but maybe I want to see the profit by product. Well, instead of creating everything again, a new pivot table and a new pivot chart, the easiest way is simply to copy the worksheet. And a quick way of doing this is to hold down Control and just drag and drop the worksheet at the bottom. This is going to give me a copy, and you can see here it says gross sales by year. Now all I need to do is click in the pivot table. Now notice when I've clicked in there, it hasn't automatically opened up the pivot table fields. Now if that happens, you can go back to Pivot Table Analyze and just click on the Show Field List button. So now I can quickly rearrange my fields. So let's remove country, and I'm going to replace it with product. Notice as I do this, my pivot chart is going to try and update. I'm going to remove total gross sales, and we're going to replace that with profit, like so. Now, of course, you're going to need to go through and change any labels and also apply number formatting, but just so you get this basic idea, it's going to automatically update that data in the new table. If you don't like this table style for this particular chart, you can then go in and just simply change it by clicking on Design, change Chart Type, and maybe this time I want a pie chart instead. Now this is picking up all of the settings from my previous chart, so I don't really want a plot area background in here. So let's select it, go up to Format, and we're going to say No Fill. I also want to have some data labels on here, so let's click and let's add our data labels, and I'm also going to add a legend. Now when it comes to things like the legend, we can also choose where we want to position that legend, so I'm going to put this at the top. Now maybe at this stage I say to myself, actually, you know what, I don't want to show the sum of profit by product, I want to show the count by product. So let's remove sum of profit. Let's drag our product field down into values, and now I'm getting a count. And this is going to look a little bit better when we apply our data labels. I might want to select those labels, apply some formatting, maybe bold, make it a little bit bigger, and make those white. And I can carry on going through, formatting this so it looks exactly as I want it to look. Let's change our title very quickly. This is Count of Product by Country. And there, in not very much time at all, we've created ourselves a brand new chart displaying different pivot table data. In the last lesson, we were taking a look at formatting pivot charts in Excel. And since then, I've just gone in and I've added a bit more formatting to these charts. So I've added a border to these bars, and I've also added an icon and also a little shape just to add a little bit of interest and personality. And if you're looking for these two items, you'll find them on the Insert ribbon under Shapes and also under Icons. If we jump across and take a look at our pie chart, again, I've just changed the colors that I'm using. I've added some border lines, and I've made the pie chart a little bit bigger. So what we're going to do in this lesson is we're going to take a look at a different type of chart, and that is a map chart. Now, map charts are perfect for visualizing geographical based data. And the reason why I want to show you map charts is because they do work slightly differently to any other chart that you'll create in Excel. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to take another copy of this worksheet. So hold down Control and just drag and drop the tab to create a copy. Now, because map charts utilize geographical data, I'm going to click in my pivot table, and instead of displaying the products, we're going to display the countries. Let's grab that and drag it down to rows. And I'm not going to do a count of the product. This time we're going to do the gross sales again. Now we don't need this pie chart, so let's just delete that out. Now, if we click inside our pivot table and then jump up to Pivot Table, Analyze and Pivot Chart, notice here we have a map chart option. But check out what's happening. It says you can't create this chart type with data inside a pivot table. So that is the first issue you're going to come across if you want to create a nice filled map chart. You cannot create it if your data is coming from a pivot table. So how can we do this? Well, the answer here is simply to remove the data from the pivot chart. So I'm going to select all of this data, Control C to copy, and then I'm just going to paste it underneath, but I'm going to paste it without any formatting. So we're just going to paste the values. So I still have my column headings just here and my data, but it's no longer inside a pivot table. How can I tell it's not inside a pivot table? Well, when I click in the data, I no longer get any contextual ribbons related to pivot tables. If I click in the one above, I get back my Pivot Table Analyze and Design ribbons. So now this data is no longer inside a pivot table, I can create a map chart. So let's select the data. And this time we want to go to Insert, and then in Charts we can select Maps. So let's select Filled Map. And there we go. If we drag this out, you can see it's basically showing a map of the world, and then those 5 countries are shaded, and that is based on the sum of gross sales. So the higher the gross sales, the darker the colour, the lower, the lighter the colour. And you can do a map chart, not just specifically for countries. If you have maybe states of America listed out and some figures, you can create a map chart for that as well, and you won't see the entire world, you'll just see the United States. Now, the disadvantage of doing it this way, by removing the data from the pivot table, is that this isn't particularly dynamic. So if any of the figures change in the pivot table, my map chart isn't going to update. So once we've taken this data out of this pivot table and we've created our chart, what we then need to do is point this chart back to the pivot table data so that if any changes are made, the chart's going to update. So this is fairly straightforward. We can click on the chart, we can go up to Chart Design, and let's go to Select Data. So now, instead of using this data range to populate our chart, we can simply delete that out and just select the pivot table data. Let's click on OK. Nothing changes, but we're now using that pivot data in our chart. So it's a bit of a strange one because you can't create a chart based on pivot table data, so you have to remove it, create the chart, and then point the chart back to the pivot table. Once I've done that, I can simply delete out that secondary data. And of course, then we can go in and we can start formatting this chart using all of our usual options. So I'm going to do a couple of changes here. Let's go to Chart Design, and we have some chart styles. If I hover over, I can see the way that that looks. So I think I'm going to go for this one just here. I'm going to change the colors. Let's stick with our kind of green color scheme that we have going on, like so. I'm going to give my chart a little title. So this is Gross Sales by Country. And I maybe want to move that legend. Do I want this on the left? Yes, I think why not? And of course, you could carry on going editing this chart. But that's how you can create a map chart based off of pivot table data. It's time now for us to do exercise 7. And in this exercise, we're going to practice some of the skills that we've learned during this section on pivot charts. And there is quite a bit that I want you to do in this particular exercise. So the first thing I'd like you to do is I'd like you to filter the pivot table so that you're only showing data for laptops, mobile phones, and PCs. Once you have that smaller data set, I'd like you to create a pivot chart, and I'd like you to use the bar chart. Next, we're going to move into formatting our chart. So I'd like you to hide all the field labels or the field buttons on the chart. And I'd also like you to move the legend to the top. I'd like you to add some data labels, and I'd like those to be added to the inside end. And when you're working with data labels, ensure that the bars are wide enough to accommodate the label. I'd then like you to change the font color of just the data labels to white. And once you've done that, you can delete the horizontal axis. And the final couple of things I'd like you to do here are give the chart a title. I'd like you to call it Top 5 Towns by Category. And then finally, I'd like you to change the color of the chart to Colorful Palette 3. So quite a bit to keep you busy there. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So the first thing we need to do here is filter this pivot table to only show data for laptops, mobile phones, and PCs. So if I use the category drop down just here, I can deselect everything and just select laptops, mobile phones, and PCs. Let's click on OK. So now we have this smaller data set. I'm going to create a bar chart. So up to Pivot Table Analyze, and we're going to select PivotChart, and we're going to choose the bar chart from the list and click on OK. So let's position this. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. So next I asked you to hide all of the field labels on the chart. And the field labels are basically these grey buttons that you see just here. So if we right click on these, we can say hide all field buttons on chart. I then asked you to move the legend to the top. So if we click the plus and go down to the legend, and take a look at this little offshoot menu, we can move that up to the top. I then asked you to add data labels to the inside end. So once again, if we click the plus and select data labels, we need to change these so that they're on the inside end. And I want you to make sure that the bars are wide enough to accommodate these labels. Now these are a little bit thin at the moment, so I'm actually going to make this chart a bit bigger by dragging it down, which is going to make those data labels fit a little bit better. And then I asked you to change the font color of those data labels to white, because currently they're not really standing out. So up to the Home tab, let's just select white from the palette. Let's select the next lot of data labels and choose white, and then the final lot and choose white. So now that we have these data labels on the chart, we no longer really need this horizontal axis. So we're going to select it, press delete to get rid of it. And then the final couple of things I asked you to do were give the chart a title. So again, we're going to click the plus. Let's add a chart title. And this is just a text box so we can overtype Top 5 Towns by Category. And then finally, I asked you to change the color to Colorful Palette 3. So if we jump up to the Design tab, into Change Colors, it's this one just here. And if you hover over it, you'll see the name there, Colorful Palette 3. Let's click to select.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To get the course exercise files and follow along with this video, click over there. And click over there to watch more videos on YouTube from Simon Says It.